Okay, so hello everyone again. I kind of debated about whether I would hold this session or not, because we talked about assessment 3 last week, and um, assessment 2A is sort of done, and the capstone is not due for a little bit yet. But then I thought, well, it's probably better to talk about the capstone earlier rather than later. If there's sort of more questions, we can always do them next week as well. And next week I'll talk briefly about the quiz, but quizzes are quizzes. There's not much to say about that. And then, yeah, so, and a bit more about the capstone as people start to get into it. So my purpose today, I think I'd like to do things in a certain order. I want to talk first about the capstone, just overview some things about it, bit of an overview, just the format of it, and how you submit your answer, the format of your answer, and a couple of slides of advice. Okay, so once the capstone's one thing, I've talked very briefly about assessment 2A, but I should just point out, I just want to give it a little bit of collective feedback, but I can't really talk about any individual assignments. If you have questions about that, you need to start a conversation by email with your marker. And also, I can't, it's really hard for me to comment on another marker's work as well. So, but anyway, so we won't be doing anything individual. It will be very brief, just a few things that myself and one of the other tutors observed in common mistakes that maybe people were making. And then last, well, again, I can't say a lot about assessment 3 without kind of like, if I answer specific questions, I'll kind of give away the answer, so to speak. I'm not allowed to do that. But you can try. And I know Isabella asked if I can just show her how to create a PDF or Word file using R Markdown. So I don't use R Markdown very much, but I can quickly show you how to do that. So that won't be too much trouble to do that. And I think that's pretty much it for today. If we finish early, that's great. I had an idea that I'd combine this, and I'm taking over the one on Wednesday to do week 5 content for various reasons. And I was thinking, I could probably put them all together. And then I thought, no, I'll never get through it if I try to combine them. So I won't. Yeah, so I'll come back again on Wednesday, tomorrow night, and do that one on the week 5 material. Okay, so let's talk about the capstone. Yeah, Paul just said, and the amount and type of comments. Didn't I talk about that last week? I thought I addressed that last week about that. And I gave an example of a kind of, I put in the, in my materials from last week, I made up a little example from a different question, and yeah, just have a look at that. So the main point was that I made the point that we're not really strict about comments, right? So it's just that as long as you put some comments in, you're describing what you're doing, then you'll get a tick for that. The other thing too is that sometimes if you use really good meaningful variable names, that can work in lieu of comments. So the combination of comments and variable names kind of help people figure out what the code's doing. But we're not really strict about the comments. We just don't want to see people put in code with no comment at all, because it's not a good habit. So that's pretty much it. So I hope that kind of answers it. And yeah, have a look at what I did, and you can just follow that. That's just one example. Maybe even put too many comments in the example that I did. Okay. Daniel asked, hang on, my plan was to talk about assessment 3 at the end. So we're talking about assessment 5 at the moment. So, yeah, so just want to keep things in order. Sorry. We will get to it though. So yeah, write down your questions so you don't forget. Okay, Emil, I'm seeing a blank screen. You should be seeing a slide that says week 5, the capstone. I do not know why. Maybe someone else can help there. Everyone else can see the slide, I presume? Yep, good. Sometimes it disappears on you, but usually if I can see it there, you can see it. Okay, so let's talk about the capstone, because that's really the major assessment for this subject. It's worth 40%. It's basically a half of the subject. Yeah. So, you know, it's worth putting a bit of attention to. Yes, so someone answered David Griffith, maybe to suggest he logs in and logs out twice. Right. So if there's no sound, check whether your headphones or whatever your audio's turned on. Other people have sound, so anyway, I don't have the time to reboot your computer. That's a bit desperate, but maybe that's an answer. Yeah. So I really can't solve people's technical problems with this. I just got to move on. Okay. So where am I? Next slide. I already started talking about this major assessment of the subject. Is where you kind of bring all your ideas together. Need to start working on it early. Well, you've already started working on it in doing your capstone. Doing your assessment 2A, although you may well want to modify your assessment 2A. Oh, one other thing you might suggest to David is open it up, close your browser down completely, shut it down and reopen it. That sometimes does the job. Can somebody type that out for David? Thanks. The only other thing is, use a different browser, but okay, he's gone out again. But anyway, so if someone can help if he comes in, because that would be good. Okay, so you need to start thinking about it early. You should have your data, if not, pretty soon, by the end of this week, I think. You need to have your data. Also, you've started now. By the end of this week, you'll have learned pretty much the bulk of the statistical techniques that we're teaching. The only thing you won't have done will be linear regression and correlation. And if you're planning to do that type of study, then you probably need to read ahead a little bit. Another comment I'll make, if you submit the capstone late, don't expect to get your final mark back on time. We'll give priority to the people who submitted on time, and then maybe someone who submits it, like 1 day late. But if it comes in 3 or 4 days late, we'll be stuck in kind of getting the marks ready for everyone else. So it may be that your marks get delayed if it comes in late. And also you'll get a mark penalty as well, 5% per day. One other thing I want to emphasize, because my impression is that few people do it, but in week 6, in the week 6 notes, there's a whole section on writing a report, and there's lots of good advice there, and it's well worth reading that, probably even this week, before you even start thinking about writing your report. Is read over that. Give some really good tips, and the people who read that do much better. Because what that assessment is about, it's really testing a couple of things. It's testing your statistical knowledge, your ability to apply the appropriate techniques for the data that you have. But the second thing is it's also assessing your ability to communicate. So communication is really important, and that is even kind of pretty apparent in the assessment 2A in some cases, that you've got to be kind of, anyway, I'll get to that in a second about what I suggest about that. But focus on how well you communicate, and I'll give you a few tips about that. Okay, the format of the capstone. It's very simple. and same as what I said before, follow the rubric headings. Reason, don't annoy the markers. If everything follows the same headings, it's really much easier for us to mark. And they're sensible headings for the report format. So, you know, and if you're going to go and use different headings, there has to be a really good, otherwise, you know, it's just, you're doing yourself a disfavor, because by putting things in different places, then the marker has trouble finding what to tick off on the rubric, what to mark, and things can get missed. So make it easy for the markers by following the rubric. So, you know, basically, this is a really basic thing. You need a title. It has to be less than 20 words. You'll see that that's what it says in the rubric, less than 20 words. Amazingly, some people ignore that and they write one more than 20 words and they get 0 for the title. It's not worth many marks, but they get 0. Or they forget to put their name together with it. That has to be on it. So don't lose marks for just stupid things. It's hard enough to pick up marks on the hard things, so don't lose them for easy things. Abstract. If you've written papers before, or even reports, you'll probably be familiar with an abstract, but some people won't. See the discussion in week 6. You'll see in the rubric it mentions the 5 key parts of an abstract. That's explained in the week 6 topic on writing a report. So that's where you can find that. Make sure that your abstract has those 5 points. You can do them as dot points, or or just separate sentences, up to you. Okay, all reports need an introduction that kind of set the scene. Basically give a bit of background to the study. Again, the week 6 topic will make a few suggestions of things that should go into it. Shouldn't be too long. I would have thought 2 or 3 paragraphs is enough. One thing I didn't say earlier, but for students who do a reasonable amount of work, it's actually a real challenge to fit it all into 4 pages. That's deliberate. It's deliberate because sometimes you have to do this when you're working. If you're working as a data scientist, you might have to provide a short brief for a manager. And you know, whatever type of work you're doing, being standard statistical type analysis or something else, they don't want to read through a 20-page report. They just want to see the real key arguments put into one place. So writing concisely is a real asset for you when you're looking, you know, when you get a job applying this stuff. So that's one of the reasons we're really strict. Well, we're not that strict. We're fairly strict about the 4-page limit. When I say we're fairly strict, you might think we're really strict because we just stop reading once it goes over 4 pages. We stop. We don't look at it. That might seem harsh, but I can tell you, if you're an academic and you're submitting a research grant proposal, and you go 1 word over, I think it's a 13-page limit. You go 1 word over, they throw out your application. That's it for the year. It's like getting a 0 on the assessment. So we're pretty generous. So these are things that happen in real life. Page limits are strict. So that's why, you know, we enforce it. It's not a guideline, it's a strict thing. So anyway, I think I say it later in the slides. So you've got to kind of, as you're writing, you've got to kind of be thinking about writing concisely, trying to say the maximum in the shortest space. Don't waste time waffling. The good ones are really clear. They set things out in a clear way, easy to mark. The bad ones, the marker has to go looking for things. Well, what did the person writing this really mean? So, you know, when you write it, be prepared to proofread it well. Maybe ask someone else to read it, but try and make it as clear as possible. Okay, so introduction, you don't want to make it too long. I would have thought 3 paragraphs is probably enough, but it depends on your study. You might have to explain a bit more, but you have to set the scene. Maybe this is where you might include some references as well in the introduction, as well as other places that kind of say why the study is being useful. So I forget, there's usually some rules to writing an introduction. I think one, you kind of say what you're going to do, you say why it's important, and I forget if there's a third one, and maybe not in that order. Maybe it's sort of, no, I think you usually say why it's important, and then you've kind of finished with what you're going to do. And the thing about a good report, even though I said it has to be brief, you can still follow this, that you kind of tell the people what you're going to do, you do it, and then in the conclusion, you tell them what you have done. That's sort of like a kind of fundamental way of writing things, at least scientific reports anyway. Okay, so the next section is the data section. Well, that's pretty much, if you've done assessment 2A perfectly, which not many people did, but you can just copy and paste that work's done. If you spent a whole page writing assessment 2A, then you're using up valuable space that's going to take away from you justifying your assumptions and discussing your results. You should be able to do it in maybe a little over half a page. And if you look back at the examples that I gave you guys a few weeks ago, you'll see that they weren't long. They were less than half a page. Now, I've seen people with assessment 2A, they were kind of like having like 2mm margins and things like that to make it fit onto one page. Unfortunately, we didn't specify the margin size, so we can't knock that back. But if you had to do that, then you're probably waffling too much. So that's kind of a message to you that if you've had to use a whole page, you probably aren't writing concisely enough and getting to the point quickly. Anyway, so that's so that's that. Of course, you can change your mind completely and do a completely different study. If you find that your thoughts have changed a lot since doing that, we don't go back and look at assessment 2A. You basically get a second attempt at it in the capstone. So it's like being able to do it twice. Omen said, our population is very specific in the assignment 2A. Can we take the results for this specific population and generalise for a broader population? Yes and no. It depends on what the reasons were for it. You've got to create a sample, right? Now, one thing you've learned is that the assumptions for all the t-tests and things like that you've been learning about are simple random samples. If your population is really broad, but you're let me say, for example, you were maybe picking apples from a fruit shop, and you said your populations were all the apples in the fruit shop on that day. You decided to define it that. And you had some method of randomly picking them out, so you're confident it was a simple random sample. If you then made your population bigger, then you wouldn't be doing a random sample if you're just doing it from a simple random sample from the one day. That's okay, but you've got to then argue it. You've got to then argue what you're doing is similar to a simple random sample for your statistical test to apply. So does that make sense? You can make it a bit bigger, and one of the things that we found was that some people had ridiculously small sample sizes because they had a really tightly defined population, and that was going to cause them problems. And we made suggestions that they just had to make it broader, even if they couldn't do a simple random sample. So anyway, so hopefully that answers it. Do you have the same markers? Yes, that's the plan, is that you will have the same markers for the capstone as for assessment 2A. Okay, method. Some people, in the past, some people have thought that the method means, if they're doing an experiment, that just means the kind of like an experiment, a method that's written in an experimental paper. Method here means the statistical method that you're using. So it could include something about setting up the experiment, but this is where you should be describing your statistical method, what you're using and why. Then you've got discussion. Now, some people put the assumptions into the method and some people put them into the results. Sometimes in stats, you look at your data, you visualize your data, and you say, because it's like this, I'm going to do this type of test. And so then it kind of makes sense to put it in the method. And then other ones, like you'll find with the regression, you can't really test the assumptions until you've actually done the method. And so then it makes more sense to put it in the discussion. So we kind of look at both at the moment. I might have to ask Yvette about what the best way of doing that is and tell you next week. But at the moment, yeah, you can put them in either. But your method shouldn't be too long. Again, maybe it might be maybe 3 paragraphs, but more if you're actually looking at assumptions and doing your visualizations of your data. Okay, your conclusions, generally you start by summarising your key results, related back to your research question. It's important that you relate it back to that. And you then, once you've kind of got that out of the way, you'd probably do that in 1 paragraph, summarise the key results. Then you might just talk briefly about implications of the results and maybe some further work that you might do if you had the time. Again, in a 4-page document, you don't have a lot of room to move. So yeah, this could be instead of 3 paragraphs, it might be more like 4 or 5 sentences rather than split it into paragraphs. References, I believe, are allowed to go onto a 5th page, but everything else should be 4 pages. Oh, one other thing, people often ask, can you put appendices in? You can put them in, but we're not going to look at them. Okay, so whether you put them in, the only reason that you would put an appendix in is just you want to keep it together for your own reference, but we don't touch them. So everything you put in there has to be self-contained. So you need to remember that. Again, people have done that and then they've referred to the appendices, but that's not, they might put, say, lots of diet box plots and QQ plots and histograms in an appendix, but if it's not in your report, we don't see it. Well, yeah, so, okay, so Natalie's question, I have to go back to that, 1 second. Do we have the same markers? Yes, you do have the same markers. Most likely. It could be, it could be we do a bit of swapping around, but I think we're aiming to keep them the same. We don't want that one tutor tells you one thing to do and then another tutor marks you wrong. That wouldn't be fair, so that's the reason we do that. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. Okay, so let me run through a few of these questions. Where do we put our exploratory data analysis graphs? Well, yeah, probably in the method, but could be in the discussion, depending on what you're using them for. Again, you'll probably do a lot of exploratory data analysis to figure out what you want to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to go into the report. The sort of things that you would be using is what graphs are telling you things about your assumptions. But they're also telling you about, that it's worth looking. So for instance, in your method, you might do a box plot and you would note, oh, my box plot shows that it looks like there's a difference that could be significant. So that could go in a method. It could also be that you use the box plot to, to justify that, say, the variances were the same, so that the method that you use might be, a standard student t-test, for instance. So if you happen to put that into the method section, when you're discussing your results, and you can discuss your assumptions, but you can still refer back to a graph in the method section. You should do proper figure captions and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Lisa's question. If we choose a topic that asks if there is a correlation and the data shows there are not, do we need to start a new topic or just discuss there is no correlation? Yeah, I think it would be unfair to ask you to start a new topic. I think, yeah, if you get a null result, then I think that's fine in a report such as this. Actually, there's a lot of criticism in the literature about people who only publish significant results, and there's something called publication bias that you may have heard of, that where lots of studies because they have a significant result, and then a lot of ones that don't have a significant result don't get published. So when people are doing things called meta-analysis, where they're combining lots of studies, they kind of end up with bias. So yeah, if you get a kind of null result, you just need to know how to report that. So you need to understand carefully that, let me give an example. Won't talk about correlations because we haven't covered that yet, but let's suppose you did a t-test. You're expecting to find that there was a significant difference, or you weren't sure, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, and then you found that there wasn't. The p-value can't be rejected, right? The p-value is bigger than 0.05 or whatever threshold you're using, and so you can't. But what does that mean? That means that you don't have evidence to support that there's a difference. Okay, it doesn't mean that there's no difference. It means that you don't have evidence. So your p-value is always about your data, or always about your sample. Okay, it doesn't refer, the p-value is never the probability of the hypothesis. It's the probability of your data being supporting the null hypothesis or something more extreme. I think that's the way it goes. So if you get a null result, it could just mean that, okay, this result shows that there wasn't a significant difference, but there could be if there was more data collected. This doesn't make sense. So you just got to be a little bit careful how you report it, that you don't overgeneralize the result. Okay. Hassam said, how much detail we have to have in the assumptions? It's hard to say. The way I'd answer that is you have to have enough detail to convince me that what you've done is correct. Okay, so like if you use a certain test, like a t-test with equal variances, and you haven't shown me the variances, then I wouldn't believe what you did. Okay, so you may have done it yourself offhand, but I want to see it. I want to see the evidence. Okay, so I want to see whatever appropriate plot. And the same as if you've got data and and the test you're using requires you to have normally distributed data, or then I want to see a QQ plot to verify that it's normally distributed. Or if you have a large enough sample, you appeal to, maybe it's not normal, but you're appealing to the central limit theorem. You can make that argument. So we want to be convinced. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, keep that in mind. I'm convincing the marker. Okay, Daniel asked, do you want us to talk about the experimental error of the study in the discussion, or do we just ignore that for this type of report? Yeah, a bit hard to answer that. I think basically, yeah, in the discussion, I want you to talk about the statistical test you've done and what the conclusions are from that. That's going to be the key focus. That's what you're going to get marked on. If you check the rubric, that's what it says. Good question. I meant to put that in, but I didn't. Is code required or just the R output? Actually, neither. Don't post the R output. This is not like assessment 3. It's completely different. And also, you should in your methods, you should describe what you've done, but don't put lines of code. You don't have the room for it, for starters. So you might say the R function t dot test was used with the bar equal option set to be true. That would be enough. That means what you've done is reproducible. If someone had your data, that's enough information, but don't see your code. Also, don't just blindly copy the R output. Just quote from it. You'll see there's a nice way of quoting. I'll just put it in the comment, say for a t-test. Let me just think for a second. The t-test showed, suggested is a better word. So I'm doing this off the top of my head, but suggested there was a significant difference between the two groups. So you'd probably be a bit more precise and talk about your actual study there. And then usually you say t equals whatever the t value is, 2.15, 2.13, p equals 4.003, something like that. So that's kind of the conventional way of reporting it. You sort of state what it's telling you, and then your evidence is this is what you read from the R output, rather than just copy and pasting the R output in there. So I hope that kind of makes sense. There should be, there are lots of examples. And when you look at the notes where they've gone through examples of running a t-test, you'll see this kind of language is used a lot, and this is the way they report it. Usually at the end of running the t-test. Okay, sorry, I haven't hit return yet. So yeah, something like that. Excuse the spelling. So that's just off the top of my head, but that kind of wording is how you would report something in your results. I think with references, I said they're allowed to go on the 5th page. I think there's a requirement that you quote at least 3. So I'll probably get back to you next week about that, just about what's an acceptable reference, what isn't. But again, the other thing too, depending on what you've done, your study might have limitations. Okay. You haven't been able to collect a perfect sample. You haven't necessarily been able to do a simple random sample because it's just impractical. So what you're doing is not perfect. We recognise that you're doing this in just a few weeks. This is not Nobel Prize winning work, and you may have had to make some compromises. Okay, so this is in the discussion. This is where you would talk about the limitations of your study as well. So maybe if you did a survey and you say, well, I couldn't really control all the bias, so there may be bias, and this may influence the results in this way. You would put that into the discussion. So it's very important to discuss limitations. Other places, getting back to references, where you might include references, just something about a technique that you want to use. You want to back up why you're using it, I suppose. Anyway, I'll try and dig up some more on that and tell you next week. Everybody asks what style of references. Honestly, we don't care. Just don't use 2 different styles in the same document. Okay, so what are they? There's APA, author year, Chicago, I don't know, hundreds of reference styles. Probably don't use the ones that they use in the humanities with just footnotes. Don't use that. You'd be stupid to use that anyway because that would take up room. So what? Don't fuss about that. We're not going to mark you wrong because you've used the wrong reference style because we haven't specified it. I know some disciplines do that. They're really fussy about it, but we're not. We just want to just use a sensible reference style and just go and be consistent. That's all. Most people won't do more than 3 references, but some might. Yeah. So say references could come from your introduction. They could come from your method. They could come from your discussion when you're talking about implications. Yeah, there's probably, if you're only going to do about 3 or 4 references, endnotes probably like using a sledgehammer. David asks, is that a research report or a lab report? What's the difference? So I don't know. I'm not an experimentalist, so I don't know exactly what a lab report is. But if I had to hazard a guess, I'd say it's more like a research report. I think what I think of the relationship between assessment 3 and assessment 5, when you're kind of working in some sort of scientific discipline, you keep what I call lab notes. If you're kind of a good scientist, you does it say 4 references? Then 4 is what it is. I couldn't remember. Okay, yeah. If you're a good scientist, you keep good lab notes. You might, you look at your data. You might try it out in different ways. You put in some graphs, lots of figures. You would also put in your code so that you can reproduce it and go back to it. When you're writing like a research paper or short report or something like that, it's a more formal document, and you don't put all that detail in. And often, as I say, in this case, it's restricted to 4 pages. So in that sense, I see it more as a research report, and I see a lab report. I call it, and the assessment 3 is more like lab notes. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my kind of picture of everything. Okay, so Eamon said the rubric says 4 references. Okay, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Where would we state our? That's a really good question. Probably, where do you think you would state it? I might throw it back at you or you guys. I wouldn't put it. Okay, so introduction, abstract, intro. Personally, I put in the methods. Yeah, the method. Just in terms of the order of things, intro. Yeah, you're discussing about it. In the data section, you're saying what your research question is. Your research question gets turned into a precise hypothesis. So that's the difference, is that, yeah. Now, whether you put it in the abstract or not, I can't remember. Yeah, maybe, I forget now. It'll say so in the week 6 notes. So remember to ask me again next week. I'll try and find out about that. Should the title be along the lines of the chapter headings in the text? I don't have that text, so unfortunately I don't have that many books. So yeah, I don't know. Can you give me an example? Just follow the rules. Make it clear. If you get the chance, make it interesting. The title can be a question, but it doesn't have to be. So what some people were using as their research question were more like titles, like an investigation into something or other. That's not a research question. That's maybe a title. The research questions in the data, yeah. You just did it for the assessment 2A. You had a research question in there, so that's where it is. Then you then develop your hypothesis. So you probably will. So I think the method's probably the place. It wouldn't make sense to put it in the discussion because you're starting to do your results. So it would be in the method. So here's my hypothesis that I'm testing. Here's my null, here's my alternative. I'm going to use the t-test to test this hypothesis. So I think that's a logical place for it. Okay. So this is taking longer than I thought, but I think it's valuable, so don't mind. So let me get to all my general advice, some of which I've said before. Okay. Now, make sure you address all parts of the rubric. Okay. It's a little bit, what's the word? It's for assessment, so make life easy for the markets. Just read the rubric carefully. I think in the first year we gave this course, people, I don't know, I got the impression that 90% of the people didn't even look at the rubric. Hope it got better the second year because we really pushed it. And so this includes small things like including your name in the title, addressing the 5 parts of the abstract. Yeah. Okay, Jason just asked, does that R code go in the appendices? Okay, what's the point? We're not going to look at it. So we don't look at anything over the 4 pages except for the references. So we don't want to see your R code for this report. We're asking for it for assessment 3, but we're not really, we don't have time to look at your R code. We just trust what you've done. You're reporting on your results. So yeah, I wouldn't bother to put it in. If you want to have appendices because you want to keep it together, fine. But we're not going to touch it. So none of the report says, none of the rubric says anything about your R code running correctly or anything like that. This is more you're using R as a tool, but it's more about are you selecting the right statistical tests. So Emily said, yeah, we only put in relevant diagrams that back up our statements. Yeah, pretty much that's right. You don't have room to put in everything. So you choose what you need to back up your statements and to convince us that what you're doing is correct. Okay, we won't assume, if you don't convince us, we won't assume. We're trained to be skeptical. So yeah, if you use a test and you don't kind of justify the assumptions, then we'll be skeptical and say, well, I don't believe this test. So you have to convince us. But you will do, you will do a bit of exploratory analysis on your data, and you'll have probably lots of interesting things. But yeah, depending on what you kind of settle on, what argument you're making, you would only put in the relevant diagrams that are needed for that. So that's right. Okay. So yeah, I haven't looked at all the little things in the rubric. Maybe we can go through the rubric next week. If that's useful to you, but you can read it just as well as me. The rubric says something about the 5 parts of the abstract. I mentioned that earlier. You'll find those 5 parts in the week 6 topic 3. So I really recommend that you read that. Okay, next stop point, avoid the use of jargon. And there's 2 types of jargon. Okay, Jason, how do I avoid jargon? Well, you figure out how to do it. So sometimes you might have to define something. Okay, so to know what why it's good to have an idea of what is a target audience. Okay, so in this case, you should think, well, one of my fellow students is going to, actually it's us that's going to be reading it, but imagine one of your target audience is going to be reading this. Okay, so there are certain terms like confidence interval, p-value. That's technical, but you would expect anyone who's done this course to understand that. So that's from the statistical technical jargon, right? But, don't go and use anything fancy that another student wouldn't understand. The other side of the coin is where your topic comes from. And so some is going to be easier than others. If someone just does a home experiment, they can do it. But if you've done an experiment from work, you've just got to figure out a way to describe that. I mean, basically, think you're writing it for a general audience. So everybody has to do this at times, okay? You're writing it for a general audience. You have to break things down to things they can understand. Or you're writing for think of your technical terms. You're writing a popular article for high school students from that point of view. because, you know, markers won't be experts in your area. So there may be one or two that you have to define. You can't assume that we know it. But again, if you've got too many, then yeah, there's usually a way to think around that. Well, then okay, Jason, you can't do it, then pick another topic. Choose another one. If you can't do it, then that's too bad. You should have picked a home experiment or had a backup one because, yeah. But I actually don't believe you. Honestly don't believe that you can't. Okay. Yeah, I really don't believe that you can't describe things in a simple way. People do it all the time. So you just have to work at it. Okay. Yeah, just this is pretty obvious, but the research question and the associated hypothesis need to be clear and testable using the statistical techniques taught in the subject. So you're going to be assessed on the techniques taught in the subject. Now, some of you, I don't know how many here, some of you may know far more advanced techniques than we're teaching in this course. For example, yeah, you may be doing linear regression. Now, some people don't know what linear regression is yet because it's week 6, but you may be doing that. And you may have learned about multiple linear regression where you can test lots of variables at once. But that's not what we taught in the course. So the idea is you have to demonstrate your knowledge of what's taught in this subject. You know, this means making decisions. So if you've collected lots of variables, you need to pick 2. One response variable and one explanatory variable. The other ones, you know, this is where your exploratory analysis will come in. You maybe look at scatter plots of lots of your different variables and say, okay, well, this one looks the most interesting. I might change my research hypothesis to accommodate that. But basically what you have to do is to focus on a technique that we've been teaching in this course. Okay. Next slide. Yeah, I'm going to say this again because would you believe it? In my marking, I had 2 people who went over the 1 page. I don't know how many times I said it. I had no sympathy for them because I said it millions of times. I don't think there's any excuse. And my feeling is that the rest of you people who, yeah, it wasn't just, yeah, George, it wasn't just in the videos. It was stated. It's stated on the assignment. It's stated in the slides from these Collaborate sessions. There's no way you couldn't have known unless you're just not engaging with the course. And the way I see it too, some of you guys worked really hard to try and get it into 1 page. Why should somebody else who's basically written 2.5 pages get the benefit over somebody else who's put a lot of time into trying to get to work? I just don't think that's fair. And it's the same with the capstone. It's hard to get it to fit into 4 pages, but people do it. People can do it. So it's possible. And in real life, you have to do this sometimes. You have limits. Reiterate a point I made earlier. I didn't say that correctly. I'll have to fix that later. Just reduce your variables to 1 or 2. You might describe other ones as possible confounders, but now you've seen the techniques. We haven't done anything with 3 variables, have we? It's always been mostly it's 2 variables, like a t-test. It's 1 variable's the response, one's the explanatory, which is just which group you're in. Correlations, 2 variables. There's only 2 cases in all the techniques that use 1 variable. Does anyone know what they are? Just to test your knowledge. Which statistical technique that's taught in this course uses only 1 variable? Okay, binomial wasn't really a statistical technique, Steve. It was just a way of working out. There is a technique called binomial testing, but it was just a way of working out probabilities. Okay, Isabel's got it. First one, well done. The single t-test. Kelly said t-test, but yeah, but there's several t-tests. There's the one sample t-test or the single t-test. There's the two independent sample t-tests, and there's the paired sample t-test. You could actually include that one as well, because the paired just works with pairs, but that's kind of cheating because the paired t-test is really a single t-test. So yeah, the one sample t-test. Okay, now there's another one. Anyone know what it is? It's this week. Yeah, one of the chi-squared tests, the chi-squared goodness of fit test. So it's kind of like, it's very similar to the one sample t-test. Yeah, the Wilcoxon's not. Wilcoxon needs two variables. Except for the, yeah, sorry, Nauru's right, except for there's a one sample Wilcoxon as well. So that's equivalent to the single t-test. So actually, so you found more, so you've done well. Yeah, so there's the chi-square goodness of fit. So it's where you're testing, you've got some data and you want to see whether the distribution, whether say everything's evenly distributed or not. Anyway, I'll talk about that one tomorrow because I'm giving the week 5 content tomorrow. Okay, so you know now that most of the tests assume simple random samples. But it's sometimes not easy to do a simple random sample. So that's fine. You then have to explain somewhere how your sampling approximates a simple random sample. And there are various ways to do that. You know, you might be, your population could be, as I said, apples from several different days, but you're only doing a sample on one day. And if you can somehow argue that the distribution of apples is not really going to change from day to day, so it would be pretty much the same as if I randomly selected the apples from different days or, you know, maybe different weeks. And just because you're limited in time, you can't go and, you know, you might want to test something or infer something over a year, but you haven't got a year to do it. So as long as you explain that, you say it may be a limitation. If there's some bias in doing that you identify, that's fine, we'll accept that. And the other thing is clearly indicate any limitations of the analysis, particularly due to sampling, because you've had to make some compromises. Okay, so that's a bit of advice there. One of the things I don't like about assessment 2A, it kind of leads you into you know, doing things like, for those who know it, stratified sampling and blocking, but then we don't teach you how to do it. If you've already collected your data, say in a stratified sample, then probably your best bet at that point, it's possible to do it, but your best bet might be let's just pick the biggest strata and I'll just limit my research question to that. So that can be a bit tricky. But yeah, if you've already collected your data, but you can sometimes just make your sample a bit smaller, providing you're not starting with a ridiculously small sample to start with. Yeah, just something that's come up as we've talked about it. Use appropriate visualizations to justify assumptions such as normality and equality of variance if you're using it. And the other main comment is proofread it. Try to put, when you write stuff, I mean, I do it all the time. I write stuff that's kind of clear in my head, but for someone else, it's not clear. You have to kind of write it, put it down, and then read over it again with a critical eye. Say, okay, what would somebody who doesn't know this, what would they think about it? Okay, so an example would be, I'm not going to mention any names, but because also lots of people were doing things on experimental designs on M&M. Boxes of M&Ms, and just a simple thing. They said, my research question was I'm going to look at the distribution of M&Ms, but What does that mean? You mean the distribution of all M&Ms in the world, or is it they meant, I think, the distribution of M&Ms in a single packet? So you just got to kind of read it and say, okay, am I being precise enough? When I be precise, I mean, am I explaining it clearly so that somebody who's unfamiliar with the project knows exactly what I'm talking about? And that takes skill to do it well. Okay, so I've kind of finished with the slides. Has anyone got any kind of further questions about those? Briefly talk about assessment 2A, and then won't talk about, but if people have questions. There's a quiz coming up. Kelly just asked, you mentioned a quiz next week. It's the end of next week. I can't remember the exact dates. I forget exactly, but I think it's on the weekend. I think we made it on the weekend, so that, okay. So it says it somewhere. Is it the 14th? No, 14th can't be right. 14th is this weekend. It's the weekend after. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the dates are over the Easter public holiday. So, will this still occur? Yeah. We still have to work. We don't get holidays. So, I guess it means if we have problems with the quiz falling over, there won't be anybody at JCU to help us. But, so it's basically, I think, the end of week 6, slightly beginning of week 7. I actually wanted to move it beforehand, but I'm not going to risk changing anything now. So, Okay, David said, I've sent an email regarding marking of assignment 2. Well, that's nice. You've let us know that. But, so fine. That's between you and your marker. It's got nothing to do with me. And as I said, you came in late, but I said I'm not going to talk about that at all. What will it cover? Everything. Yeah, all the content of the course. David, it's no good CCing me. If I didn't mark it, I'm not going to comment on it. Okay, it's between you and the marker. And if you're still in dispute, then what you'll have to do is contact the subject coordinator, because I've got my own ones to worry about. How long is the quiz open for? I think about 3 days, 2 or 3 days. I think it's 3. What's it worth? 20%? Yeah, it doesn't show on the assessment tab, and there's a reason for that, because it's not open yet. Because if it showed, I think people could then start doing it, or some reason like that. And it's not meant to be done over, it's only meant to be available for those 3 days. So when we get to that stage, it will open and you'll see it. Is the quiz in the same form as the first one? No, it's a different form actually. It uses a different quiz tool. Because what this one does is not everybody answers the same questions. They're kind of randomly generated. But one thing, I'm not sure it was being said, I think you get 2 attempts at the quiz. 2. Yeah, Hussam just answered that, asked that. You'll get two attempts. And the mark will be not the average, but the best of the 2 attempts. I have no idea if there's any assessment on the 14th. I don't carry in my head when the assessment's due. Yeah, assessment 3 it will be, yes. Yeah, that makes sense. That's due at the end of this week. Natalie said, it will be a question pool, so each attempt will be different. Correct. Does the assessment include R coding? It's a bit like the first one. You don't have, I can't remember, to tell you the truth. I don't think there are any specific questions on which is the correct R code, but you'll find that if you don't have R open, it'll be hard to answer it. So you do need to use R. Is it time boxed per attempt? Yes, it is. 1 hour per attempt. Yeah, it's a real mixture of everything. yeah, more about interpreting, but there is some calculation as well, and that's what you would use the R for. So, it could ask you, yeah, I'll give you one example that possible question. Whereas you can just read in data and do a t-test, okay? I don't think them, yeah, if there's anything like that, it'd be only small data, but, um, but what was I going to say? But what, yeah, although, yeah, so for the capstone, you can just use like the R function t dot test, for instance, to do a t-test. What we might give you in the quiz is, here's a, for this situation, the mean was this and the standard deviation was this for this group. The result of a t-test is something or other, so you have to calculate it manually rather than just use the R function. The R function is only useful when we give you data, but if we just give you the standard deviation, the mean, you have to then understand the notes, which says how to actually do the t-test manually. So that's an example of something. Danilo, I believe there's a short answer as well. Yeah, that's assessment 3. That's due this week, end of this week. So what we mean by short answers, they're just some small questions with short answers. Yeah, it's not in the quiz. That's correct. That's just this week. The quiz is multiple choice. How many questions will there be? I think it's 15, same as the first one, from memory. Could be wrong, but I think, yeah, because I haven't looked at it for over a year. What about assessment 3? What about it? Haven't you done it yet? Haven't you finished it yet? Haven't you started it yet? There are 3 questions. Yeah, you should have basically finished it by now, or close to finished it. Maybe mixed up about what we're talking about. Assessment 3, Nuru, assessment 3 is what we talked about last week. Yeah, that's right. Thanks. I think maybe you've kind of got in your head something to do with a quiz. It's not a quiz. Assessment 3 is just combination where you put in answers to the stat question. There was 3 questions, 1 probability, a couple of on tests. Okay, in assessment 3. So I think we're probably going to skip assessment 2A now. I'll just post it. I just had a few comments, that was all. So, yeah. Okay, when copying code over, can we highlight, copy and paste into Word? Yeah, that's exactly what you're meant to do. Just select it. If you got in RStudio, just select it, highlight, select it, just copy it straight in. Not a big deal. Comments and all. Yeah, no, nothing tricky. Isabella was asking how you save. Are you still here, Isabella? Yeah, okay. You asked me before about just to show you how to create a Word file from RStudio. I'll just show you. It won't take a moment. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing R Markdown if you don't already know it. You're just too busy. Take it on as something to do later, to be honest. It's not hard, but it's just that you've got enough new things to learn, particularly if you're new to R and maybe, haven't done stats for a while. I just wouldn't take it on. But yeah. But does anyone want to see it anyway, what you do? Okay. So just useful anyway, even for later. So I don't use it much, so I'm a bit rusty, but edit file, markdown. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so let's see if people can see that. Yep. I just, oh, so before I take it off, one thing I did want to show you about assessment 2A, this is a box plot of the results 2018 versus this year. It's slightly worse, but not too bad. Yeah, not too bad. Certainly the median's sort of well above 6. So, and the thing that we found in 2018 was, even though they weren't really high, in the end, the capstone was quite good. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One, because people improved it from the feedback. And the second thing is that the capstone, this is only a small part of the capstone doing the data part, which isn't worth a huge number of marks. So it's not everything. So I just thought I'd show you that just to maybe set a few minds at rest. Anyway, so that's that box plot there. So let's just go over. This is pretty much an untitled markdown file. Basically, you kind of have your R code in these kind of triple quotes and things like that. It's a way of mixing your text and your R code all together. And what you do, oops, I closed that accidentally. What you do is, okay, so if you want to create a Word file, you just go up to this knit, K-N-I-T, and you knit to Word, and it produces a Word file of this. First, you have to save it. And because I didn't give this a proper name, this is my document. So it's kind of a nice method, and maybe we should teach it in the course, but I just feel people have got enough on their plate to burden with something extra, so we just make it optional. But that's how to do it. If you try to do, in theory, you can do knit to PDF, but you have to have something called LaTeX installed, which is a kind of like a word processor, document manager. And if you don't have that, then it isn't going to work. I've got it installed, so it will work for me. So anyway, so that's basically how it looks. But I don't recommend that you delve into it at this stage if you don't already know it. It's just an extra thing to learn. And I know one guy last year, he was interested in it, but he made that decision that he was going to do it later. Okay, so what did I do then? No, it's not easy to save it in PDF. You have to have extra software installed. Your best bet, if you want PDF, your best bet's to save it to Word, and then you can just go into Microsoft Word and do save as PDF if that's what you want to do. Yeah. Okay, just go back and answer some of the questions. Yeah, just couldn't put a plot into the markdown. Yeah. Anyway, you can. Yeah, I think your best bet's just to just run it in RStudio, copy and paste the stuff into Word at this stage. Okay, Daniel, I thought you've asked this a few times, or maybe it was somebody else. If we have a code that works but is not the most efficient code, we will get marked down. I forget, does the rubric say anything about that? Okay, I think we used to have it in there, but I think we may have taken it out. Yeah, so if it's not on the rubric, then we won't mark you down unless, oh, I suppose we would, if we were running your code and it took like an hour to run for something that should take less than a second, we might be concerned. But yeah, but we're not really judging it on efficiency. But honest, I can't think what you would do. Everything's really simple in this assessment, as far as I was concerned. It's really more, the assessment's really more a test of you applying statistical skills, really. What will be the last date to complete? I can't remember. Sorry, John. I just can't remember what is the last date. It could be Tuesday or Monday. Isabel said there is no assessment. Yes, there is. It's just you can't see it yet. Yeah, I mean the quiz. That's right. They probably won't be posted. I'll check into it anyway. I'll have to see. Maybe I'll just post it on the discussion forum about when it will be open, when it closes. I'll have a look. I have to talk to the people who designed the website about that. Okay. David asked, any tips on creating one group out of box plot? I don't really understand your question, unfortunately. So I'll just make a note to. Okay, so I just made myself a little note to check what Emily just asked, and it'll get posted on the discussion forum. Oh, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, no, yeah, David. Yeah, just have a look at the notes. There's plenty of examples where you do. You're saying just do a. Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, I think you're getting a bit close to the assignment question. I can't answer that. I don't think Nicholas asked. Yeah, good question. For answers in assignment 3, should we have R print the answer with percentage symbol or leave the answer as decimal? Yeah, I don't think we're fussing about that. You can have R print the answer as decimal, and then you can report it as a percentage if that's what it's asking. That's fine. We're not. It's not really a test of sophisticated R skills. It's more a test of do you have the statistical knowledge, and you're just using R to support that to actually do the statistical tests. Okay. I think I have to go pretty soon, so yep, I will post the slide. Okay, so all right. So I don't know how many of you come to the Wednesday session, but I'll be there tomorrow as well to talk about week 5. Okay. So have a good night. Lisa just asked quickly, yeah, you have to write to the tutor. I can't answer it, so yeah. Ask again. Just yeah, it's a shame, but yeah, just maybe they weren't clear on what you're asking, but yeah. Well, what I'd suggest, if you're, yeah, okay, Lisa, what I suggest you do is, because the second one, if you're talking about the research question, that's straightforward. If you're talking about the second one, then I think you probably need to go through the rubric one by one, and just say why you think you need. If you want to change the mark, you have to argue why you think that you've satisfied the rubric. Does that make sense? Michael, did this start at 7 p.m? It certainly did, which is what was advertised and always has. So unfortunately you missed it by looks of things, but you hopefully have the recording, which I'm going to actually turn the recording off now.